Hey, this is Barry. In this video, I'm going to share some family history with you. I guess we'll call this Car Talk with Barry. This is a photo of my grandparents and their 1958 Chrysler New Yorker. Now, my grandfather originally wanted a Chrysler Imperial, but there was some sort of slip up at the dealership, and they offered him this 1958 Chrysler New Yorker. So that's what he bought. It was a very beautiful car, and this is the color. It was either aqua or turquoise. I don't know the exact name of the color. That was the actual color of his New Yorker. It had the 392 Hemi engine with a 4-barrel carburetor. These were quite massive engines. They were all cast iron, and they were heavy for a big, heavy luxury car. And my father and his family went on several vacations across the country in this car, and they made quite a few road trips in this car. It must have been a great thing to take a car like that on a road trip. These cars were air conditioned. Some of these had rear air conditioners that would actually blow cold air from the back window area. These cars were quite a work of art. They were much more beautiful than the late 50s Fords or Chevys. That's just me. They made a lot less Chryslers than they did the Fords and Chevys. But when my father got old enough to start driving, this beauty became his car. And he told me several stories of things that went on when he was a teenager when he had this car, and he would drive that car up Highway 1 towards Oil City back when that was a 2-lane road in excess of 100 miles an hour. When you get a big car like that up to that kind of speed, it just kind of smooths out. And with that big heavy Hemi engine, it's like a bullet. But he loved this car, and one day he decided to run away in this car, and he parked it behind a friend's house, and his father came along with a spare key and took the car away. And when he got back home finally, my grandfather took him for a drive in a different vehicle and took him to a used car lot on Texas Street in Shreveport. And he pointed out, "There's your car. You lost your car." I think if that were me, I'd have been broken hearted. That's quite a spectacular car. You wouldn't want to lose that. He always wanted to find another one of those, and he spent years looking for one. He came across a lot of 57 and 58 Plymouths. You know, of course they made more of those than they did the big luxury cars. But I believe in the early 70s, he came across one while making a trip through Arkansas. He found it, parked here. It wasn't for sale, but he thought he would just get a picture anyway. That's the only one he came across, but it wasn't for sale. About that time, he had a 1969 Dodge Super Bee. And when I came along, he found a 1957 Chrysler Imperial 4-door hardtop that he bought from a junk dealer. And I was about maybe 5 years old at the time, and I took a liking to this car even at that early age. And then he decided to just park it out in the cow pasture. And when I was about 17, I got somebody to help me pull it out of the cow pasture with a tractor, and I got that car running, and I was driving that car all around there. And some of my relatives that lived in the area, every time they saw me coming down the road, they'd say, "Here comes Barry and his Batmobile again." They seemed to think my car looked kind of like the Batmobile for some reason. I had a great video from back then of, going around the car, and the engine was running while I was working under the hood, and I don't know what happened to that video. It's gone. It was quite enjoyable to drive, even as it was original. It only had about 54,000 miles on it. I drove it around a while, and the transmission went out, and I rebuilt the transmission, and I took it on several trips out on the highway. I drove it about an hour and a half north of there, it was fun to drive that car. It was a very interesting and unique car. And here's one of the interesting and unique things about it. Take a look at this speedometer out of this car. It had purple dash lights in 1957. It was really interesting. It was like a light show when you turn the lights on at night in this car. The instrument panel was just a complete pleasure to look at. I mean, look at that. This is just the speedometer. Just imagine the whole instrument panel. Take a look at what it looked like when you turn the lights off. Now, these cars had radium paint on the numerals and letters on the instrument panel, and this would almost kind of glow with the lights on, but when you turn them off, it had this unique green glow. These would glow for quite some time. These things were energized because they were radioactive. I sold those Imperials that I had to buy some Plymouths. I wish I'd have kept those. You can't have them all, not unless you're rich. But this is a two-door 1957 Chrysler Imperial that I saved from the crusher. This car came with blue tinted glass. There was a man hauling it to the junkyard, and I stopped him and said, "Hey, please don't scrap this car. This is something special. You don't just scrap something this rare." I bought it from him, and come to find out, he had found a little junkyard that someone had been collecting these old Chryslers, and I guess the widow didn't know anything about them. She just gave them to somebody to scrap. There were several. There were New Yorkers and more Imperials, and I told a local collector, and he bought this car from me and went and got those cars to save them. These were quite impressive engines. Some years ago, I was at a machine shop locally here in town in Shreveport, and somehow these late 50s Hemis were brought up. Yeah, of course there were earlier ones, 331s, but this 57 and 58 Hemi were the 392s. Most of these came single 4-barrel, but the Chrysler 300s came with this engine with two 4-barrel carburetors. It must have sounded really mean when you put the hammer down on one of those with two 4-barrels. And then I believe in 64 they came out with the 426 Hemis. I believe they were pretty much the same engine. They had two 4-barrels on a lot of those. But they told me there at that machine shop that they had an old Hemi in the back room, and I said, well, could I take a look at it? And I went back there, and this was actually a engine that came out of a boat. Then the manufacturer of these boats actually special ordered a marine version of the 392 Hemi, and these 392s on the valve cover said Chrysler Firepower. This one said, I believe it said Marine, Chrysler Marine on the valve cover. Very interesting. As far as I know, it's still sitting there, but that's probably been 20 years ago. But I kind of got lucky when I bought my Plymouth, because I found a man who had been going all over the country collecting these. And I came along at a time when he was ready to get rid of them all. And he had several 57 Furies. This one you see without the front end in front of this red 63 Falcon was the 57 Plymouth Fury, red and white. And the car sitting behind it that you can't see, also with the front end off, was a 1957 Belvedere convertible. It was black on black, black convertible top, and it had a white stripe down the side. It had the molding of a stripe, but inside wasn't a metal insert like on the Fury. It was painted. And unlike the Belvedere or Fury, the strap didn't go up onto the fin. It just kind of went down and ended at the back of the car. Here's just a few of the old cars. This car to the left is a 1958 Plymouth Belvedere 4-door hardtop. It had the 318 V8 engine. And this car in the bushes here was a 1957 Plymouth Fury. And this was a 1958 Plymouth Suburban wagon. It had a kind of unusual engine. It wasn't the 318. It wasn't the Hemi. It looked kind of like the Hemi, but it wasn't a Hemi. It had the, it's kind of like the head and the valve cover were made around the spark plugs. I'm sure some of you probably know what that engine was, and you can comment below. That'd be great. But this man that I bought these cars from, he had a 58 Plymouth Belvedere convertible that he had kept out. That's the only one he kept. I bought all the rest of them from him. It was about a total of 8 cars, but a lot of those had been parted out, and some of them were still restorable. You know, one was a 4-door 58 Plymouth sedan, and you know, those would have had the metal framing around the windows instead of the windows sealing at the top of the car. But he had this 58 Plymouth Belvedere that he had painted up real pretty, red, and had a white top. And he actually bought a 1958 Chrysler DeSoto for the engine. It had the 392 Hemi. And he put that Hemi in the Plymouth, the 1958 Plymouth. Now, sadly, they never put that great Hemi in the 57 or 58 Plymouth. But he said it bolted right in just the same. You know, the 3-speed cast iron torque flight transmission. He said it bolted right in. He said he had to adjust the front suspension torsion bars a little bit. But it was quite a car. It's a shame they didn't put that engine in the Plymouth. But this car was the best one. He had, you know, since he was the owner of a body shop, he had restored most of this one. It had 1958 hood, and it had a 1958 trunk lid, but the rest of it was 57. There was just very little left to do on it when I got it. And I spent several years getting this car going and finishing up the details, and it was sure fun to drive. This one had the 318 with 2 4-barrels, but it sure did sound mean when you romped on it going down the highway, all 8 of those barrels opening up all at once. Yeah, it was fun to drive. But something that wasn't fun is I found that when I would drive it out on the road, it's almost as if it was so unusual that people would just veer towards you going down the highway. You know, they'd be coming towards you in the other lane, and it's almost like they're magnetized towards you. You know, occasionally some people would do that, and it was very stressful. It was very enjoyable, but when you get it out on the road, it could be very stressful. I had one occasion where I was at a gas station, and some drunk guy comes up and he's saying, "I haven't seen a car like that in a long time." He must have been in his maybe about 30, and he was leaning up against the car and stuff, and you know, he had this big wad of keys, and I kept thinking, man, get away from my car. When you spend that kind of time and money on a car, it can be stressful. That was my problem. I enjoyed it, but I couldn't handle the stress. And I guess you could get real good insurance to cover that, maybe. But it's still kind of stressful. But that was a long time ago, and I could afford it back then. But now, I could afford it back then because I didn't have to pay for a house or a lot of things. And, I spent all the money I made on this car, basically. But as time went by, and I didn't want the car to deteriorate, I felt that a car like this deserves a climate-controlled garage. And I couldn't provide that. And I'd gotten married and had several kids and couldn't afford it anymore. And, my wife likes a lot of animals, and I was afraid I was going to go out there one day and find 3 or 4 goats standing on top of this car. And I didn't think my heart or my marriage could take that kind of stress. So I decided that I would sell all these cars. And I sold them all to one man. And that was before I had the ability to advertise things on the internet. And I basically gave these cars away. The man who bought all these cars from me, including the one convertible and every parts car I had, and the best car that you see here, I heard later that he had sold just the one car to a doctor for more than double what he paid me for everything. But I guess I didn't realize at the time that you could advertise online and a lot more people would sell it versus just having it parked in front of the house with a for sale sign. All through these years, I never really had a good camera or video camera. This video coming up was taken with a big old video camera that took full-size VHS tapes, so it's not the best video, but it is what it is. this is just some of my history, and I wanted to share with everyone. And I still have a love for these late 50s Chryslers. Actually, I like just about anything late 50s Chrysler. But these days I only have pictures. Some of these old pictures and videos I like to go back and look through to reminisce. I still have a Chrysler. I have my 2004 Dodge truck with a V6. I hope you enjoyed this little family history I'm sharing with you. Feel free to comment. If you have one of these cars, share some stories. Did you pull it out of a pasture or find it in some woods somewhere? That would be interesting to find out if others have had a journey such as mine with these old late 50s Chryslers. But thank you for watching.